and good morning in the United States, good evening in Europe, now with 1 hour in difference less, such as we are on normal time again and no longer on summertime. And
you.
Oh, yeah, well, the friendly me being in the middle of Europe, such as Germany, and it's getting dark outside. It's 7 o'clock now. And yes, the rest of the world is still having fun with their time zones.
Fun.
It is a challenge still. So
yeah, I'm still happy to get my 1 hour back.
So you're looking forward. Cool. Today is a very interesting topic we have up front of us in the discussion, because we are very keen and eager and curious to learn about some facts and figures how EX, the employee experience, is helping to create and set the framework for a better customer experience. As we always follow the wise setup from Thomas, such as the experience is what the customer is feeling and not what we are designing, quote, that is important to reflect, but in setting up and trying the very best to go into the emotional waves of our customers, we try to do our very best. Our guest today as expert is Rebecca Wettermann, which I'm welcoming actually big hug virtually, and also appearing, and now he's there, Patrick, welcome as well.
Yes.
Hey, Patrick.
So it would be nice, Rebecca, if you could introduce yourself a bit, tell us a bit about your career, earlier stations, and I was quite curious about that after a lot of years you are going to set up your own business, such as, if I'm not mistaken, Valoir is your own company.
That's correct, Ralph. Thanks. It's great to be with you today, and Patrick's excited to be here as well, as you can tell. So I've been an analyst covering the software space for more than 20 years and started Valoir a couple of years ago, really with a focus on 2 key areas: employee experience and customer experience. So from a technology perspective, that means looking at obviously the CX stack and sales, marketing, service automation, and broader customer service and analytics tools. And on the employee side, looking at human capital management, about training and recruiting, about the whole employee life cycle. And it's interesting because, we see a lot of parallels in the space, right? We're both dealing with applications that impact people, all differently. And we've often seen CX lead EX in a number of areas. CX went to cloud first. It brought in analytics and AI first. It started looking at industries first. But I think what we've seen in the past 12 to 18 months is really a focus on investing more in employee experience and understanding how that really impacts the overall CX picture.
That is something that makes me happy to hear, because that's something that we've also been chasing for at least a year now, is the connection between CX and EX. And the possibility that you've actually got numbers on that topic just makes me giddy.
I'm always glad to make you giddy, Marshall.
Well, it's a challenge.
The interesting aspect is, as we have had an arrangement of several ideas we could talk about, we have chosen that one, but we want to tease a bit our audience as well on the coming up in January discussion we would like to take as employees, how they learn how they learn and be educated at work, how they generate experiences, and how also the employee data experience is. What is happening with my employee data is the challenge in which I guess you will touch as well in the value of ethical personalization and how to navigate properly. So as this will be our topic in January, just give us a little teaser. This is a bit the aspect we are often jumping into GDPR, but how employers are handling important, valuable, to be secure data from their personnel is also an interesting question.
It is, Ralph, and I'm so glad that you brought that up, because that's one of the areas where we see HR leaders really being ahead of the curve. We said CX is often before EX, whereas in HR leaders thinking about the way they handle employee data, thinking about being good stewards of that data, thinking about how their AI models are transparent and without bias, or are consciously working to eliminate bias, puts them way ahead in a lot of cases from the marketing folks and how we think about not just the legal use of data, but the ethical use of data.
Yeah, it is great that thinking that HR, which is traditionally not customer facing at all, is actually going to have a real impact on line of business through working with the employees. It's, again, giddy. I love the way things all work. It all fits together.
Well, and I think too, it's a topic we could talk about today, but I think there'll be even more to talk about in January, Ralph, as we continue to see questions about evolving regulation beyond GDPR and the ethical use of data, and what happens on different social media platforms between now and then as well.
And it is touching as well how we create a customer experience through the employees, and if they are motivated, happy, and enthusiastic, it is always our gut feeling that they would walk the extra mile to make customers even more happy, or to do at least the very best and plus. So I'm curious, when you took the idea of the research, how AX is influencing CX, what keys of people have you been touched, which type of organizations, and where are your sources of the data you could
Sure. So there's a lot of interesting data out there on employee experience, but we chose to take one key source, which was Fortune's best 100 places to work. Now, there are limitations of many data sources, but what we found is, that's based on extensive survey data that's been developed over years by the Best Places to Work organization, which is very respected in the field. And they rate a number of different factors when coming up with their top 100 list every year. So to take a apples to apples comparison approach, we looked at the 100 firms on that list and then looked at their financial peers. So for the firms on that list, 47 of them were publicly traded companies, and we looked at the financial performance of them versus their publicly traded peers. So all of that's publicly available information.
And when did you have solely that data, or did you do also some interviews with employees?
So we based it on the Fortune information, and if we looked at Glassdoor and some of the areas where you can look at customer data or employee data rather, but we found, like any source, it can be gamed in certain ways. So we felt like being consistent to come up with a list 47 of the 100 companies were publicly traded. That gave us a big enough data set from a statistical significance perspective to understand, was there a correlation between being one of the best places to work and having outstanding or better financial performance than your peers.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, did you then in your systematic equate financial performance with CX?
So what we were looking at,
how did you create the link?
Yeah, we looked at their reported profit margin, right? And what we found was that compared to their peers, those that were on the best places to work list had more than 2x times the profit margin, once we normalized the data, of their peers that were not on that list. So a pretty significant difference in terms of profitability.
Quite true, but how's profitability? How's the link between profitability and CX?
Yeah, that's where it gets challenging, Thomas.
Yep.
So certainly understanding.
We might want to change the name of the show to the hot seat.
No, it's good to have a good conversation. It's interesting, Thomas, because we try to look for what is a good measure of understanding company performance. Certainly customer retention, the ability to be efficient, to deliver efficient customer responses, to deliver customer satisfaction plays into revenues as well as margins. And to your point, we started looking further at, is there another measure for understanding the CX side of that? And I'll be honest with you, it's something we're still digging on. Because what we found when we looked at net promoter scores was that depending on the source, those could have a high degree of variability and, frankly, questionable comparability if we're looking from company to company.
So try to also, sorry, didn't want to interrupt. Were there also other measurable indicators you found in the data, such as the customer satisfaction score, the customer effort score, aside of the NPS, which I would agree is sometimes a bit tricky to put it in the right arena.
Right. We found the same challenge with looking at customer effort and customer satisfaction scores, particularly when we look at those organizations. One of the things that we're looking into now is looking at other sources of data beyond what may be customer reported scores or company reported scores. So, for example, looking at positive and negative mentions on social media as another potential measure, recognizing the flaws that are there. And those are interesting things that we'll continue to explore, and I'm sure we'll have more to talk about.
Yeah. The overall link is an exciting one, actually. So that's it's probably why there's so little data. Well, data about it in terms of, that's going beyond anecdotal stories that are done by vendors to promote their own stuff in order to, show some results. Yeah? So from that point of view, we are really quite excited. So in details, are there any differences between industries?
So when you look at the overall data, the biggest differences in ratio would be in the tech industry. Now, that's not necessarily surprising, right? Because I may have companies and their peers that are in very different levels of growth and profitability, even though they're considered peers. So that was the area where we saw the biggest contrast between those that were on the best places to work, and those who weren't.
Yeah. Did you also have a chance to look into different roles of people and whether how the effect of different roles satisfaction to customer experiences?
We didn't necessarily look at different roles, but what we did find was interesting was the sort of things that made up a best place to work and how that would contribute. So they were around things like opportunity for developing talent, They were around transparency and openness. They were around ESG and around
What is
diversity and
My apologies.
it's okay. And environmental, social, and governance. So
Okay.
organizations' sustainability policies.
Okay.
For example. So ESG, environmental sustainability and governance, and also around as a component of that, their diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies.
Okay, how's the correlation?
And so those were factors that played into these companies going on to the best places to work. And the reason I say that, Thomas, is because a lot of this comes down to culture. I can employ technology to drive efficiency and support a certain activity, but at a certain point, the underlying culture has to support that. Otherwise, I'm just using a technology to amplify whatever leadership is already doing. And so I think what we find when we look at these organizations is that it's not just about the employment of technology, but it's having a culture that supports employee growth, that supports diversity, equity, and inclusion, that supports good corporate governance, that drives overall performance.
And what were, aside of the very impressive better ratio, how the organization is doing overall and is more successful, some data you digged in to find the differentiators. Transparency we had, the opportunity to be a green company, which is a bit buzzword bingo, because as Valoir is utilizing green, you are wearing green like Valoir. Marshall is having green background, partially me too, such as this is sustainability, and that life and green is standing for life. So what else is popping up a bit in that scenario where we have the key differentiators, where you which jumped formally at you and said, if somebody is doing that, then he has a real fair opportunity in getting a differentiator.
The other key area, Ralph, was opportunity for career advancement, right? So having learning and training programs for employees that supported not just here's the compliance that you need to have, or here are the things that you need to know for your current role, but here are the things that you need to grow as an employee. Here's a career path for you, and training, not just traditional what we think of as training, but training opportunities and learning opportunities for employees to feel like they were valued as individuals and they could grow along with the company.
In the old days, the three-letter company with the people which always came with this business suit, where I made my jokes, I'm married to a former ex-IBMer, so I have to be cautious. Elsewise, one of the pens is flying at my head, and I get a bit disturbed. No, they had very clear roles and how they develop people and how they gave them feedbacks on a 3 months regularly basis, and you had your skill improvement and general how you are doing speeches and talks and whatsoever. And the German expression is more handy for me than to do it in proper English. But you had these reflection setups with your boss or the boss of your boss. That is a 3 persons meeting, 6 eyes. And from there, you have been taken forward. In these days, driven by pandemic, let's say, surroundings, such as portals, I just fell over another introduction of the improvement of Microsoft Viva. Was, for instance, one of the things I observed, that people are trying very focused to create platforms for self-education or to form them. Is this something in the direction you found as well?
So certainly platforms that fall beyond the traditional way we think about learning are areas that we see companies that are investing that are very interesting. Whether it's, to name another specific company, Salesforce Trailhead and what they're doing to enable employees to learn. ServiceNow just made an announcement, I think this past week, about their investment in learning and enabling folks to learn how to develop and deliver on their platform. So we're seeing a lot of outside initiatives that employees can take advantage of, but also broader programs like providing support for education funding, providing support for coaching and mentoring, which in our Future of Learning at Work study we published earlier this year, we found that was the top way that employees say they learn at work, was learning from mentors and coaches. But traditionally, only a small percentage of employees have had access to coaching and mentoring, right? It's typically been either a small subset of a particular group or those on a very specific management track. And so one of the most interesting areas we're tracking in the EX space is looking at what are those technologies today that enable us to do mentoring and coaching at scale, that can enable everyone in the organization who wants one to have those kind of mentoring and coaching opportunities, which is what employees say the way they learn best.
I was going to ask how the technology employed by companies affects employee experience and the total picture. So you've already gone there for me. How does that work out? What's the range?
Well, it's funny, Marshall, because the last time I was here with you gentlemen, we were talking about digital transformation and about how employee experience was sort of way behind the investment curve of other areas like sales and marketing and IT. And I think what we've seen is a lot of companies working very hard to catch up in the use of technology, partly because of necessity. If I'm not in the office with people, doing those one-on-ones becomes more challenging, but also because of the capabilities that I have with technology today to be able to match people in a data-driven way at scale, to be able to connect people with mentors and coaches at scale. There's a lot that we've seen with the technology, coupled with the window that has been open for experimentation to think about how do we first make do and then make better in the way we manage employees that we've seen over the past 2 years. That's created a lot of opportunity.
And did you observe here with the 47 companies, when I guess that you, by mentioning some of the initiatives organizations are taking, that, for instance, just to name a few, Microsoft, Salesforce, ServiceNow, probably also Sugar in their initiative to educate partners, that it is very interesting to see how these programs are taken advantage of the employees, but are they also suitable to utilize for partners that they might benefit as well?
Yes, and I think what we're seeing is less of a distinction between different pieces of the community, right? If I think about folks, we can go back to the Trailhead example because we know it. I see partners, I see customers, I see job seekers, I see a lot of different people on the platform. And in speaking with partners, I see more and more partners in the ecosystem, not just at Salesforce, but at other companies as well, that started as an admin, that started as a solution architect, that started as a business leader in sales or service, deploying at their own organization, and then going on to a leadership or professional services role. So they've moved from customer to partner in a lot of cases. So I think if we think historically, there's been a sort of, I train partners and I teach customers, and that line has really started to blur.
Wow. So if I understand it properly, you found out in the research that as there are no longer walls in the educational opportunity perspectives, everybody is able in these well-performing organizations to pick somehow his new self-educational career path, take his next steps in his own hands. Would that be exaggerating or somehow true?
I think that's a common theme that we see in leading organizations when it comes to employee experience. The move from push to pull training, the move from everything created within our walls to we're going to look to those outside resources. I think those are fairly recent evolutions in the HR space that have driven the exact kind of changes that you're talking about.
Love it. One of the things that we have all talked about on and off over the past few years, I think, is job security and the changing nature of being employed. And what you're telling me, it speaks to the idea that businesses are providing continuity and a future for their employees. You're much less likely to get trapped in a particular job or a particular job description. There's education, there's extension, there's more for you there.
Now, let me react to that with two kind of points.
Please do, because I love being wrong.
CX dude. Number one, yes. When we looked at how employees choose places to work, we found that the consistent factor across almost all age groups beyond salary was the opportunity for career advancement. That's the number two factor that all employees are looking at, job seekers are looking at when they evaluate future employers. Second, we're seeing really, really interesting investments when I think about moving from skills-based hiring to aptitude-based hiring. So rather than hiring someone who fits a particular job description, looking at their skills profile and what their ability is to match with that organization and to grow within what that organization needs. There's some really interesting innovations happening there.
That's great. What we were told growing up a lot of times was that, if you go to college, it was more about proving that you could get a degree than actually what you studied. It showed that you can learn and can follow instructions. This is yet another version of that, it sounds like. Just show that you're interested and that we can teach you.
Well, it's interesting too, because we're seeing some companies now look at, rather than hiring for a job opening, they're hiring for candidates and then looking to the technology to match those candidates with specific aptitudes that may have been roles or job descriptions that neither the candidate or the company thought of as a good match for them before.
It sounds a bit like the Sorry, Thomas, start.
If they are using the technology to match it, that sounds a hell of a lot like AI. How do they make sure that this AI is not biased? I mean,
well, that's all we have time for this week. Thank you very much for joining.
No,
probably the short version is enough.
The short version is everybody's working hard on making sure, and I think what we see in the HR space is some really, really thoughtful work there. Like if you look at, for what example, HireVue is doing in the space in putting out their specific models. They're essentially freezing the models in time because what they recognize, and they have a long description of their AI practice that's available on their website. They recognize that if you're an employer looking to interview and hire employees, you can't have an AI model that's changing, because then you're unfairly impacting employees that may come in at different points of the process in the model. So what we traditionally think about an AI model as being continuous learning, they've purposely built their models so that at a certain point, they're frozen in time, making sure that each employee coming into the process gets that same interaction and that same level of evaluation. rather than having that model maybe evolve in a way that skews toward a specific type of candidate, for example. So that it's a very complicated question, Thomas,
it is,
but I
and
think there's some
it
very
has lots of
sophisticated
impacts,
thinking going on in the HR space that,
Yeah.
frankly, we could probably learn from on the CX side.
Agreed. I would love to dive into that more deeply at some point.
Mhm.
You know, how do you keep an AI from becoming biased? How do you keep yourself from becoming biased and letting it seep into your AI? Not the questions that we're here to talk about today, things that we can do another time. But again, great
Actually,
topics.
if you dig in Isaac Asimov and his findings, you could get a bit nervous on, if you recall these famous science fiction shows or films like Colossus, where some big computers decide what's best for the world, and that human beings are more or less a bit a disturbing factor. Yeah. So let's put it in the way what I thought, as in before Thomas put his question to the ring, was that universal opportunity of I'm offering you a job and develop your talent sounds very much what we know from our dearest Sridhar Vembu from Zoho, such as I go with small little offices, get talent aboard, and give them an opportunity instead of taking care of cars, washing them, or doing something else. Develop the real skills, or if you have limits in your family, that you get a proper education paid, that you take a job at a company and then educate yourself further on.
Yeah, I mean, Zoho is certainly a great example where they've taken a lot of effort to bring folks in at an early level. Another really interesting company that I've been looking at is Guild. And what they do is provide organizations with, much like I would say, oh, I'm going to fund a certain level of employee to go off and do their MBA. They help companies create programs to do that at every level. So it could be a high school graduate equivalency diploma. It could be community college. It could be a certain certification program. So helping companies understand where are the opportunities for their employees, and not just funding their ability to enter those programs, but giving them the support and guidance they need to be successful, right? So if I've just finished my high school diploma and I don't have experience in higher education, it's not just a matter of paying my tuition.
Yeah.
It's helping me understand what are the study skills I need, what are the resources I need, what does a course schedule look like in terms of time impact, how do I manage all those different components that go with a higher education. They're bringing that now, saying as an organization, you can have everyone having opportunity to have these outside learning opportunities rather than just a certain group that may be looking for an advanced degree, for example.
That sounds very much like the mentoring approach. An example you have taken at the start of the conversation where you said in the old days, you needed a mentor or coach to drive you through this. So if those smart companies which are successful have taken that approach, it's very much that you have ages ago when I started my university education, I looked exactly for such mentors and found them in fellow students which were in higher semesters and have gone their path through the Death Valley, and now they knew where the water tanks are, and we were shown where we find the water tanks and not how to jump into every shithole. Yeah,
that's one way to put it.
Yeah, well, as newbie,
Very colorful.
Well, I like vivid pictures, you know that, and especially on that dedicated topic, I'm an expert. Not the water one. The other thing is, that knowing where the water tanks are or where you have an easier path to survive, because, for instance, there were always, during my studies, several student killing examinations in mathematics and statistics. And I'm very honest, I'm not brilliant in that arena. My sons are, luckily, because they have a lot of brains from their ma. From my end are language skills. Suing or calling rude names is one area. The other is they are gifted foreign languages candidates. So they speak Turkish, Malay, English, French, Spanish, and such, and Japanese. So I'm sometimes a bit overwhelmed. Just as an example, how these educated people can get better jobs in such a new environment which is opening. But coming to the point, the curiosity, which is really driving me mad, is what are some names of the 47 so found brilliant ones? And especially if you have a differentiation in industries, that you could name drop some of these successful candidates, which are outstanding.
Sure, I can even read, and anyone can find this list if they look for the Fortune Top 100 places to work. Cisco,
They have
Hilton,
a 47% chance, yeah.
Salesforce, NVIDIA, Accenture, Rocket, American Express, Capital One, Intuit, HP, Marriott. Interesting, the hospitality names that show up.
Yeah.
Mostly hospitality, financial services, technology. Pulte Group, which is home construction. Real estate investment.
Are they mostly in the United States, or are some of them also more European driven?
There's also one that is a 3-letter acronym from your neck of the woods.
Ralph, there are nearly no Fortune 100 companies out of Europe on this planet.
SAP is on the list.
It's only very few. Most of them are either in the US or in China. But what's interesting actually is the name Salesforce. Not that I doubt that they're a great place to work. I mean, that's fairly known.
Glassdoor,
but the dichotomy probably is that they are not highly profitable.
No, so these are based on the top places to work. But if you look at, if we want to dig into the data, we can talk about the data. So if I go back to Salesforce and look at their peers.
Even that sounds stupid, but what is the understanding of peers? Could you define peers?
That's not stupid. What I look to is Yahoo Finance, because Yahoo does comps for each publicly traded organization. So that's a pretty common standard. That's where we came up with their peers. But if you look at Salesforce, Thomas, you're right. Not highly profitable, but when you're in a group with Snowflake and Shopify, you're doing much better from a profitability perspective.
With startups which in the past decade probably got funded because of they are fast in wasting money or in spending money. Sorry, I wouldn't say that Snowflake is wasting it. Means that has a real impact on profitability. But if I compare Salesforce also to companies like Oracle, Microsoft, SAP, these are far more profitable.
Right.
And probably far less great places to work as well.
They still
that's why there surely are outliers in data. But how do you explain that Salesforce is that great place to work then? I have an idea why they are not that profitable, but that's besides the point.
Yeah,
No,
each of
just to
the
explain that, they actually have a pretty smart growth strategy by staying barely profitable.
yeah, it's interesting when you go back and look, and I've spoken with the folks at Great Places to Work. It's a really interesting company. They have been doing blind surveys of employees for, I want to say something like maybe 2 decades now, where they are they're given access to be able to actually go and survey employees on a number of topics. And to make it onto the Great Places of Work list, it's not just a matter of the employee survey over a period of 1 year. It's a number of years that they look at to understand, this isn't a blip, shall we say. But yeah, it's an organization I would encourage people to take a closer look at, because they have a lot of really interesting employee data going back for a significant period of time.
So what makes them a great place? It's worthwhile saying that, actually, I think.
Yeah.
Well, if they weren't, we'd have to back it up.
I think the other interesting thing, if I look at the list, is the hospitality firms that are on this list.
You mentioned Marriott as one.
Marriott and Hilton is another one as well.
Yeah.
Obviously, both global organizations.
Yeah. And it is not that I'm struck by lightning that Marriott, who is one of my eldest example of how customer relationship management, in a sense of being aware and appreciating a customer coming back, getting, if he has one of these company cards or one of these Marriott reward cards or what similar is now established in nearly every hotel chain, that there they give you the feeling coming back home. And this is, even that it's artificially designed, or might be artificially designed, that it is a different experience than when you come to some different hotel chain, which has not yet that standard it's established. And
well, it's interesting that both Hilton and Marriott are on the list. Both thought of as having that culture, initially family-driven cultures, remember? I don't know if that has anything to do with it.
And you were mentioning in our chat that there were no airlines. Am I surprised in the moment for the last 2 years? No, I am not. And if I look especially
only 2 years.
Well,
the
last 2 years have been very, let's put it politely, impactful. Those which have not been under Chapter 11 or something similar and cried for money from the state, and which not went broke or had some severe troubles, they are restarting, but with less service than they even had before. My observation, a very personal one. And that is concerning me to a certain degree, because what I have been telling in some earlier shows, my dad, who is now 86, has been working for one German airline. And he was driven that customer happiness is something very important. And so he did some tricks on doing some very special stuff, even that depending on the role he had during his career, he was in education and some other areas. He was a sales representative. He was a trainer of sales representatives, and he has done a lot of VIP services. And he was also in customer service. And imagine a hunter flying in a group to Canada, shooting elks and some other stuff. And then what they took away is lost with the luggage. So those are areas where the relationship building is so extremely important in keeping that up, that I have observed that this is like a bit like a roller coaster, but on the way down. Yeah. So I was wondering if these organizations, if they are not in the top 100 list and not one of the 47 very well performing, how will they develop a good customer experience?
I think it comes back to culture, Ralph. We can have the best technology in the world, and what that enables us to do is scale whatever is the direction driven from the top, whether that's in the employee space or in the customer space. One of the interesting areas that we're looking at right now when we talk about customer service and support is how I'm using AI not just to do automated responses to customers or fuel chatbots, but how do I use it to really coach agents in a meaningful way? How do I use it to enable managers to really understand what's going on at scale when they may have thousands or 100,000s of cases a week to look at, to be able to really do meaningful things and understand how they can take care of agents, whether that's with coaching and support or addressing issues that they may be having with customers. And that's a really interesting area where the technology is there now. And I think one of the areas where, if we look at the tech sector, for example, where things like being able to predict escalations, being able to understand how to prevent escalations from happening, knowing that an escalation does not necessarily mean a happily resolved customer.
No.
So call centers and the technology organizations we know, like our dear friend Martin Schneider or Ginger Collin and the colleagues working there, or Dr. Natalie, for instance, these companies do have some technologies aboard which are helping and guiding through their analytics, also in AI, that they help them with the suggestions. For instance, if you take that course, you will be better prepared to find some smarter answers for the next calls for tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, because your customers asked you in certain directions which were not in the script, but we have there's something to help you. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, certainly you mentioned Martin and Support Logic. Some of what we found with their customers is very, very interesting around the ability to not just prevent escalations, but understand where they may have challenges with customers where an escalation never happened, right? So lack of escalation doesn't mean I have a problem with the customer. It may mean that they leave without telling me that they have a problem. So really being able to have that deeper understanding of data. And on the Genesis side, I think what they're able to do with weaving together the workforce understanding and the customer understanding is very, very interesting. Mm-hmm. And the idea of getting contact center leaders to adopt AI for things like optimization, where they can actually see and try the AI to understand the real business impact it has before they make a decision to turn it on, for example, across all of their queues, is an area where they're thinking about, how do I help bring leaders along in their understanding of AI and understanding how it really can impact positively the agent and the customer.
So is there still that opening gap or this edge where the lemmings are running off between empathy and profitability, and that empathy for the employee would have been the driver to get a better customer experience instead of chasing profits?
I think what we're seeing, again, is going back to culture. If I'm investing in employees in the right way, I may have a longer term view.
Yeah,
right?
I'm with you.
The Valoir.
I may have a longer term view.
But I have the impression that not only looking for the US, where I have hundreds of examples, unfortunately. There is one large chain for not warehouses. Warehouse is the wrong explanation. Karstadt Kaufhof is a large chain like Macy's or something like this, a very old traditional one. And one Austrian guy who is in investing in real estate. Yeah, thank you, Thomas. Is driving this historically chain nearly to its limits. They have had the fourth case of going into insolvency. What's the English word?
Bankruptcy.
Yeah, bankruptcy. And now they are crying again for shutting down 40 more sites, getting people unemployed. And what I am observing is that if the market is not able to take up these resources in a proper way, it's not only a waste. Sorry?
Resources? You mean the houses? The houses?
No, the houses are already gone. I was mistaken by using the wrong word. The brilliant human intelligence, which is focused on serving as its best to deliver a cool customer experience, is set free onto the market. And to get them in that skill back again, I wonder where they should get a new employment. And so I'm asking the same for the wisdom, the knowledge, and the technology industry. If people are set free, independently on which departments they are thrown to the work market again for employment. Does it, from my perspective, it is hurting an organization, not only in its culture, because this is the magic word from today's evening or this talk, but also knowledge and to keep knowledge to a certain state and level for an organization could be endangered by letting off too many. So how do I keep the customer experience being driven forward?
And how do I take advantage of technology in areas like field service, where I may have a few group of experts who maybe are at the point that they don't want to work full-time anymore, but can be those subject matter experts, provided I give the tools in the field to those younger, less experienced field service agents or techs, give them the tools and technologies to be able to take advantage of the expertise that's built up in the organization and in those more experienced employees over time.
I would like to take up, as we are going to the near end of the hour, is Amazon at any means a good example, either in being one of the top 100 best places to work on, or even of the 47 ones which were so well performing?
Amazon is not on the list.
Amazon, them as a top place to work would have surprised me, really. But they are actually quite a good example, because they have the reputation, and I deliberately choose those words. They have the reputation of being a CX leader. They also have the reputation of not treating their people overly well.
My understanding,
and currently they are not highly profitable, at least the non-AWS part.
Right.
Having said that, so somehow they must be doing something right? So, question, in how far could there be a relationship of treating the right people right?
Ooh, Dangerous.
That's very dangerous terrain, I know. But I mean, the drivers are getting fired by a machine.
Yeah, it's worth asking. I mean,
Yeah.
There's got to be a big difference between the experience of an Amazon employee who's a driver or a warehouse worker and an Amazon employee who is developing technology for them. And we know there is, because you get horror stories out of the warehouses and, gee, I love this job out of the devs.
And
But if you look at the other companies on the list, you know, I have companies like Hilton and Marriott on the list who have a very diverse pool of talent as well, in terms of hourly versus salaried, in terms of skill and education level. That same sort of dichotomy in terms of a workforce that to a certain extent Amazon has, and yet they're on the list.
I was too shy to ask if there are any banks by a sudden in that famous list of 100 cool places to work. If I would be one of the hedge fund managers of one of the last bank houses and I have a salary rise as in the thousands of dollars, even I did a shitty job as somebody lost his money and I still get a lot of money more. I was wondering if this can be observed if banks are cool places to work.
There are a number of financial services firms on the list. Capital One, American Express, Progressive.
3, yeah.
And
anybody in industry such as General Motors, Ford, a car maker? Tesla?
I'm not seeing a car maker on the list.
Yeah, well, I would have had my serious doubts if you hear the stories again, like Masha said, there are some horror stories in how the manufacturing lines are kept alive, and if they analyze this a bit more in detail. So that's interesting, and I'm now very curious to dig into that list. And yeah,
it's interesting too, because the companies on the list, I mean, we've talked about culture a lot, but you also look at what is their kind of interaction that they have with customers, right? So for the tech companies, there are a lot more opportunities for automation to be able to drive those kind of margins that I'm talking about. Whereas Marriott and Hilton have automated a lot, for example, but not to the extent that a tech company that's delivering software as a service could. They still have to rely on a certain extent of human capital.
Well, you say with tech, you have a lot of opportunities to engage. Now, this is one of Ralph's and my favorite disagreements. So, can a machine exhibit empathy?
Is that a disagreement or a question?
No, it's a disagreement about the answer to that question.
It can be trained to exhibit empathy, can't it?
Yeah, well, my reply is, if it looks like empathy, smells like empathy, walks like empathy, then it probably is. So, so it doesn't need a human behind it. That's my point of view. Ralph begs to differ, and he has good reasons for that as well. He's more the humanist than I am, so I'm kind of a tech head.
Call me Robo-Ralph.
Well, I think we can dig into that a lot more when we talk about the ethical use of data and understanding the value of ethical personalization. Because that comes down to digging in on some of these AI models that we talked about, but also about what really goes into understanding and training those models and what the disconnect is today we see between those folks in the chief privacy or chief legal office saying this must be done, and the folks who are actually in the trenches doing the work.
Yeah.
That was a very smart cliffhanger, I would say.
That conversation is going to be a good time. That's January, February timeframe?
January.
January. Well, then we know when we're talking to you again.
Yeah.
And I look
Excellent.
forward to it greatly.
Yeah. And
Always a pleasure.
before we honor the hour, which is just over, we have our usual famous last words that we are asking for. So who comes first, the employee or the customer, Rebecca?
It's the chicken and the egg question.
Yes, of course.
Right?
Why making it easy? You're
We could go for the camel. Where does it start? If it's rising at the front or the back?
Yeah. But beyond chicken and an egg. So what's your take?
I think companies have to look at both. And what we're seeing is an evening out that has not happened in a long time between understanding what I need to do with and for employees and what I need to do with and for customers. And employees are not customers. Let's be clear. But the customer is not always right either.
Luckily so, yeah.
And very well said.
Very well said, and thanks for that. It's always enlightening to have a chat with you. So there are good
Thank you all for
perspectives.
having me.
I love your perspectives.
Thank you.
It was good. It went so much better now that we didn't have technical problems.
Yeah, and LinkedIn only relooped 3 times. So that's
And that's good.
well,
Only 3.
only 3 times. So
Awesome.
somehow those developers and engineers need to get that thing resolved. Call to StreamYard and LinkedIn. Okay. Thanks to everybody who was still there, and we still have an audience if I look at the numbers, unless they are fake too. So
Oy.
we know about alternative realities, right? Thanks to you, Rebecca. Again, this was a pleasure. It was fun.
Thank you.
Yes.
And see you in January. And bye to everybody else.